Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anu Malipatil, and I lead Overdeck Family Foundation, a national foundation focused on measurably enhancing education, both inside and outside the classroom. We invest in areas of early childhood, informal STEM, educator effectiveness, and student-centered learning across grades K through 9. Let's kick things off with a quick look back at 2023, which was quite a year. We saw chronic absenteeism numbers increase amidst workforce challenges and continued struggles nationwide to catch students up academically. And in response to this learning loss, we saw the potential of high-impact tutoring continue to grow, while more districts and states embraced evidence-backed solutions like science of reading. We also saw generative AI come onto the scene, spurring innovation for tech-first organizations and platforms. And there was renewed energy around the importance of STEM learning and more conversations around the role families can play in driving student success. So much more has happened, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. As you reflect on this last year, what would you consider to be the biggest disruptors in the education space? You can vote in our poll, which is popping up just now. I'll give you all just a minute to pop your answers in here. I'll be curious to hear what you all think. Okay, it looks like we've got some great results, and it seems like every option got some response, but it seems like staffing challenges really rises to the top, followed by chronic absenteeism, AI, reduced funding, and then science of reading. So we'll look forward to touching on many of these topics today throughout our conversation, which I'm really excited for. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm excited for today's webinar, which marks the launch of our foundation's 2023 Grant Making and Impact Report. This report highlights what our grant making accomplished this past year and shares the wins of the organizations we fund. We've dropped a link to the report in the chat. If you haven't already, I do hope you'll take a look to explore bright spots detailing wins from the 12 incredible organizations that are joining us here today. Aligned with these bright spots, we've divided today's conversation into 3 sections: innovation, evidence, and growth, which will enable us to go deeper with leaders to learn about the key drivers of their success. They'll share how the education landscape shaped their decision-making, in addition to sharing advice for other leaders in the field. In the report, we're also proud to highlight key achievements of our grant-making efforts from this last year. In total, Overdeck Family Foundation dispersed $53.5 million to almost 100 grantee partners this past year, collectively reaching over 66 million students, 3.9 million families, and 500,000 educators nationwide. Specifically, we funded 15 early-stage organizations and saw the development of 26 new prototypes. We funded 36 grantee validation and research studies. 2 grantees increased their ESSA tier, with 11 grantees meeting Tier 1 and Tier 2 evidence standards. 31 grantees increased reach, and 22 increased earned revenue year over year. Grantees strengthened 31 organizational skills with capacity building provided by the foundation. And lastly, our support helped our grantees attract over $67 million in public and private funding. It's so exciting to see this progress, which was possible because of the collaboration between our internal teams, our grantees, and the sector at large. So thank you to everyone who supported this work in the past year. Now, before I turn to our esteemed panelists, just a few quick housekeeping items. First, we'd love our conversation to be interactive, so please share your thoughts in the chat. Second, we have some time at the end reserved for Q&A, so please submit questions throughout the discussion. And be sure to include a specific panelist if you have one in mind, so I can direct the question to the right person. And lastly, we are recording today's session, and a link will be sent to all who registered. So let's welcome our first group to to talk about how their organizations unlocked innovation in 2023. As I mentioned, more information about each organization's innovation efforts is available in our grant making and impact report. But to set the stage for our innovation conversation, as I introduce each panelist, I'll share a bit about how each of their organizations debuted exciting new approaches, interventions, or models in this past year, really in response to the unmet needs they saw emerging in the landscape. So I'll have you all join me here on video. Tina Lanese is the president of Science Buddies, which launched its Google Classroom Science Project Pathway, say that 5 times fast, designed to make it easier for K-12 teachers to support students as they concept, develop, and present school science fair projects. Oliver Saunders Wilder is a director of technology at Tools of the Mind, which piloted SEED, an app that enables teachers to assess young children's self-regulation development within regular classroom activities. Sandra Sheppard is executive producer and director of Kids Media and Education at WNET, which launched several new initiatives, including Mobile Adventures in STEM, a free bilingual family texting program that sends weekly messages with links to media and activities to the children's show Cyber Chase. And Vicki Zubovic, who is Chief External Affairs Officer at Khan Academy, which launched Khanmigo, an AI-powered tutor fueled by ChatGPT that's designed to improve teaching and learning. So let's get this conversation started. Let's start with this first question here. What's your perspective on why these last few years have been so ripe for innovation in the education sector? And how do you think this trend will change as we enter a constrained fiscal climate? Oliver, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Anu, and thanks for this question. So at Tools of the Mind, we've been building and using technology to support teachers and children for more than 15 years, but it definitely feels like the pace of innovation and the embrace of innovative technology in the last few years in education has been really significant. As I see it, I think there are a few factors that have enabled this. I think in particular, thinking about EdTech, the pandemic drove use and learning. So coming out of the pandemic, we see tremendous capacity and comfort with technology in the early childhood programs, teachers, and families that we serve. And I think related to this, we really observed a transformation in the perspective on technology and its impact in the field. It feels like some of our partners who maybe, 5 years ago might have seen technology as sort of an add-on, really have come to see that technology can be integral to the services they provide. And so ultimately, I really think this is a trend that's going to continue. I think that as a field collectively, we've established that technology in education can be really powerful. In particular, it can increase accessibility and equity and access to resources for teachers and families, can provide immediate, visible, real-time, useful data that's actionable, and that reduces the erosion of instructional time for teachers. And it also, I think, is a really powerful tool for strengthening the home-school connection and enabling families and schools to work together to enable every child to achieve their full potential.
Thanks for that, Oliver. Would love to invite you into the conversation, Vicki.
Thanks, Anu. I think we saw some really interesting trends between 2020 and 2023, 24. In 2020 and 2021, we work with 500 school districts across the country. We've got about 1 million kids participating in a particular structured program. So we saw a lot of different communities grappling with this. So in that 2020, 2021 period, we saw schools really focusing on making school safe to come to from a health perspective. And they were really focused on the logistics of making that possible. But in 2022, 2023, and it continues now in the second half of this year, we saw more focus on and bandwidth to focus on academics. Mm-hmm. We know that was accelerated by the stimulus dollars. But we are also seeing tech fatigue, right? And when kids were coming back into the building, teachers saying, I don't want to be on a computer. I don't want my kids on the computer. So there's some tensions here with coming back into the building. I want to do different things. I was using tech a lot more than I ever have, but I actually don't want to use it now. So we're seeing that sort of trend we had to work through that trend, right, in 2021, 2022. And as I said, 500 districts across the country. So we're really reaching not just your early adopters or that person who's really comfortable with tech. We're reaching teachers who are not necessarily comfortable with tech, right? We're helping them bring tech back into their instructional design. So I think that there's an openness to doing things differently. I think there are some headwinds, right, when we talk about tech. And I think we're still working our way through that. But I do see more urgency focused on academics, and I see that a lot in upper, middle, and high school, because the timeline for addressing that is closing in the minds of leadership. And so I see more openness to different solutions in those grade bands than I'm seeing in younger grade bands.
Super helpful to hear sort of that trajectory over time and even to see how that's been evolving. I appreciate that perspective, Vicki. Sandra, I would like to invite you in to share your perspective on this question.
Sure, and just to give a little bit of context, so CyberChase is a trusted, it's a well-researched PBS media project that engages millions of kids and families in informal math and environmental science learning. And we've been looking at the factors as well that really make the need to adapt and innovate more urgent. So a couple of them that really are guiding us. First of all, America's demographics are shifting. A number of you mentioned kind of the transformation of the media and tech sectors, and we are seeing that firsthand. Families are changing the way they consume media. Certainly the pandemic accelerated growth in digital media. I think there is some fatigue, but there is still a very strong appetite for educational media, I think both at home and also in the classroom. And then obviously the pandemic, as we all know, exacerbated educational inequities. So all of these factors really have motivated us to think about new ways to better serve and expand our audience. And our approach with CyberChase is to embrace this multi-platform model, to make our content available on as many platforms as we can. So we're on, PBS broadcast, online, mobile apps. We offer parent and educator digital resources. And one of the things we've done in the past couple of months is look at where are families and teachers going. And YouTube is certainly a top digital destination for search. So even though it may not sound innovative, I think it's key to our multi-platform strategy. So we launched a channel just 3 months ago. We've seen some great early success. I think we have about 350,000 unique users. And it's a place where we can be nimble and experiment and monitor audience behavior and respond to it. And that's pretty exciting. I also want to make one more comment because you asked about funding. And I am generally optimistic that innovation attracts funding. And even if we're seeing some more limited or constrained funding in the coming year, I think limited funds can actually spur innovation because we all have to think of ways to be more creative and cost effective.
Thanks, Sandra. I mean, I think it's really interesting to hear each of you speak about real shifts in the landscape that really drove a need for your organizations to respond and a real attention to how the landscape continues to change in order to figure out where to go next. So I think that's really a really thoughtful theme that's running through. Tina, I'd love to invite you into this conversation to close us out on this question.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I want to add to sort of what you were just commenting on. Science Buddies delivers resources for hands-on STEM learning through our website, which reaches millions of K-12 students and educators every year. Our theory of change focuses on building STEM skills and knowledge through independent STEM projects, making sure that they're more interesting for K-12 students, easier for instructors to manage, and a deeper active learning experience for all. And one of the key metrics that we've been tracking closely through our annual surveys to educators is just access to technology and how that's changed over time, specifically the one-to-one device trends in schools. So when we look back to 2017, before the pandemic, educators who responded to that, to our survey about the number of students who had their own devices, was around 30%. It was pretty low. And then as a result of the shift to online learning that was driven by the pandemic, the rate almost doubled. And now we're seeing 70% post-pandemic levels, and it's held fairly steady since then. So that completely changes the landscape in terms of what you can do and what you can offer students and educators. And with the majority of students having their own computer and tablet, it's a completely different game. There are opportunities to use technology to develop resources, to better support educators and drive deeper engagement with students. And for science buddies, what we can do now is we can look at how can we explore ways to support students more continuously throughout the course of their project. So rather than just having had the opportunity to help them once when they were, in a computer lab or at a library when they had access to a computer, now we can look at how can we support them all the way through that journey from beginning to end. So that for us was a major shift. And while we look ahead to trends, there is obviously as ESSER fundings dry up and devices reach end of life, is that going to continue? Is that going to be a trend that continues in terms of the access to devices?
Yeah, super helpful. I think, there's so many beautiful themes that are popping up here. I really hear changing landscape needs. I'm hearing paying attention to where people are, whether it's kids or teachers or adults, and the shift in practices and behaviors that was really brought upon by the pandemic, some of which has sustained as a real inputs into your innovation, which is sounds very strategic and relevant. And you all touched on technology. So let's go there as the next question, which is that many of your innovations this past year use technology to improve the experience of your products. So I'm kind of curious to hear you all speak about how the technology made it easier for you all to innovate and how this innovation really increased your ability to meet the needs and demands of your customers. Tina, why don't we start with you on this one?
Sure. So when we think about innovation, the number one thing we think about is how we can support our audience and how innovation can improve their outcomes and programs. One of our early innovations was the Topic Selection Wizard, which is a recommender to help students find a science project that aligns to their personal interests. It's built on the premise that intrinsic motivation is a key step towards developing lasting STEM interests. This fit the need and access model that we were working with at the time. It solves a pain point for both students and educators. It could easily be used at home and in schools wherever students had access to a computer. And it also supports our program outcomes by connecting students with STEM projects that are personally meaningful. Now, as we just talked about, with the majority of students having their own devices, we can think more broadly about how we could support a student from project start to finish, rather than just occasionally during the course of their project. For a middle school student, project typically lasts anywhere from 1 to 3 months if it's done well, and should include a series of assignments that serve as check-ins along the way. Students typically work on these projects outside of school. So what sort of system could we develop? That's how we think about it, that would both improve the effectiveness of the educators who could be working with 100+ students, and then also improve the student engagement, skill building and learning in STEM. So using Google Classroom, we created pathways that educators can automatically assign to students. These pathways create a customizable schedule for students to follow, provide students with instructional resources for added support at each step of their project, and include student self-assessments to help educators identify students who may be struggling with the project, which is important. By offering students and teachers more continuous support for their projects, we also create opportunities to better understand our own strengths and weaknesses with our materials. So we have pre and post surveys to help us understand how the resources are providing and supporting student interest and understanding in STEM. So now we have this mechanism that we've been able to create through this innovation that allows us to better understand where can we improve our resources and continue to iterate and improve the learning experience for students. So for us, that's a really important factor, is that ability to create an ongoing support mechanism for us to understand how we can continue to impact and improve the experience of providing our users.
That's great, Tina. It sounds like there's just so many benefits at many layers, both for students, for teachers, but also for you as an organization as you continue to learn and improve. And that just sounds like a real benefit of the sort of continuous support model that you all are aiming to implement. Sandra, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure.
Jump in on this question.
As a media company, we turn to technology to help us reach audiences where they're consuming media. So I want to put a spotlight on a project called Cyberchase Mobile Adventures in STEM, because it leverages a technology that is cost-effective and pervasive: smartphones. So this project is a free bilingual texting program that engages families in at-home math and environmental learning. And just to give you a sense, how does this work? Well, we worked with local public television stations in different communities who had trusted relationships with schools, libraries, community organizations, and they invited families to join. And families who sign up receive weekly text messages with links to Cyberchase videos and these playful STEM activities. And we actually, Mobile Adventures builds on a successful NSF-funded pilot. And in this past year, in 2023, we actually expanded it nationally to 15 markets. And I think I just want to share kind of 3 key design principles that were the foundation for Mobile Adventures in STEM. First of all, including the voices of families was absolutely key. We consulted families at every step to ensure that what we were developing reflected their values. And one of the things we found is that the environmental messaging really resonated with families. The second is to ensure flexibility and choice. We wanted to make sure that the STEM media and activities, we put them into families' hands, but we were as supportive and flexible as possible. So families had language choices. They could participate in English, Spanish, or toggle between the two. They had activity choices, indoor, outdoor, different lengths. And I think having access to the program on their phone made it very convenient for them to conduct these STEM engagements with their kids whenever and wherever it was convenient. And then the third principle was about personalization and connections. Sometimes we put content out there, but with Mobile Adventures in STEM, we encouraged families to share back. So we would share with them, they would share back images, descriptions of what they did. We then shared with them a digital badge, which the kids loved. And we invited them into these closed social groups so they could share with other families. And I think this two-way communication really built motivation and increased engagement. And I'll just close it out by saying we are working with a research partner, Educational Development Center, in a larger scale research, but a couple of the findings that are really interesting is that parents, we're seeing some increase in confidence, but we're also seeing parents who say that they are integrating science discussions and environmental discussions, not only when they're doing the activities, but in their daily lives. So that's really interesting. And the research is still underway, but we'll have more to report soon.
That's really exciting to hear, Sandra, especially as you all are continuing to gather more insights and information. But I thought those 3 principles are super clear, and I think, as you mentioned, are aided by technology in a way that would be much more difficult without it. Vicki, I would love to hear from you on this question.
This is a great question about, how has technology helped us innovate? And I'll just be really quick. We got access to GPT-4 18 months ago. We got put under an NDA for about 6 months, but we started to do some real experimentation with the technology immediately and sort of did it in these 3 waves. And we basically put in the first wave, 10 people, 1 week, check it out, come back and tell us what it can do, what you think it could do for educators, for schools. And that 10-person team came back a week later and like, whoa, we actually think there's real potential here. Here are some of the ways it maps to our wish list or our roadmap or what we think that teachers, could be grappling with. And we did that 3 times. And at the end of that 3rd experimentation wave, we essentially had a list of a large number of things we could do. We chose 2 things: build a tutor for kids, build an assistant for teachers inside the product. Could we do that? and we time bound it every step that we did and made sure we had a deadline. But when we made that decision to build a tutor and an assistant for a teacher, we basically put 60% of our resources onto that project and tried to build it in roughly 10 weeks. And we did an MVE in 10 weeks time. We thought we wanted to build a tutor, and we had scoped a project, and we thought it was going to take us at least a year. So just this new technology was game changing for us. And that's kind of how we engaged with it on the design side. And I can talk later on about what we did once we built it.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. I mean, I think I'm hearing even from all three of you so far, just the importance of voice, whether it's families or students or potential users, to help really shape which direction the product might go in. I'm also hearing flexibility and choice, as you named, Sandra, in all of these examples. So I think it's a really nice connection point between what you all are sharing. Oliver, let's have you close us out on this question.
Sure. So I think, just as you were saying, I mean, one of the key goals for us at Tools of the Mind and using technology is really to bring us closer together with our partners. In an ideal world, we'd be able to be in every classroom providing support at all times. But in the real world, resources are limited, at least so far. You can only, can't be in two places at once. So for us, technology has provided a way to be incredibly nimble and responsive to the needs of our partners. And it also enables rapid iteration and the ability to provide real-time responsive interactions. So I'll give a quick example. So back before the pandemic, a key part of our model was to provide in-person classroom observation and coaching for our partners. And as you can probably imagine, this was a barrier to scaling because, we serve districts all over the United States. And propelled by the pandemic, we developed Tree, which is our video coaching platform, and it allows teachers to submit videos of themselves teaching via a mobile app. They receive detailed feedback on those videos and suggestions and support from our team. And this has not only allowed us to scale our impact and reach more districts and more children, but it also provides real-time insights that have let us customize our professional development and optimize support for our partners. And likewise with Seed, technology has enabled us an approach to assessment of young children's development in a way that provides both intensive longitudinal data and supports teachers' understanding of children's development, but it does it without sacrificing valuable instructional time in the classroom. And in addition to streamlining the data collection, the technology is enabling us to really close the feedback loop, letting us provide targeted scaffolds and support suggestions to teachers in real time based on each child's data. And without technology, those kinds of things just wouldn't have been possible for us.
Yeah, I love hearing the consistency in some of your reflections here, Oliver, just around how data can really drive the insights and learning to ensure that you can close that feedback loop, to ensure that your product really is meeting the intention or the aspiration. So appreciate that reflection. We are going to head into our last question here, and I'm going to ask us to keep this one short and as brief as possible. But I would love to hear sort of what advice you might offer to other nonprofits who are listening and thinking about like the key factors that drove your decision to innovate, and also just reflections on what are the top risks they should keep in mind. Oliver, jump in.
Sure. So I'll try to keep this short. I think there's three main pieces of advice I would highlight. So the first is, and this really I think mirrors what so many of my fellow panelists have been talking about, is develop with your users. We have found that the input, feedback, co-construction from our users throughout the development process has been invaluable, and it's something that we learned so much from. The second I would say is don't neglect customer support. We found that things like how-to videos, onboarding, customer support have been critical factors in our success in getting high adoption rates and high usage rates with our partners for technology innovations. And then the last one is just people often wonder about whether to outsource technology development or build capacity in-house, especially for small organizations. It can be tempting to go the outsourcing route, but my experience has been that really only works if you have someone in-house who's experienced the technology and understands your product needs and customer base well. And just to touch briefly on risks, I'll just highlight two. The first would be the sort of ever-changing privacy and data security landscape, which is something you want to invest time in understanding up front. And the second would be just to keep in mind that technology evolves really rapidly, as we've all been observing. And so you want to think about it not as a one-time investment in building something, but as something that's going to be an ongoing process.
Yeah, super clear, Oliver. I appreciate that. Develop with users, pay attention to customer support, both in the beginning and to keep them engaged. Think about the build buy decision and to keep our eye on the ball, both on security, privacy, and just the ongoing pace of change, which we spoke about at the very start of this conversation. Thanks for that. Vicki, why don't you jump in on this question?
Plus to what Oliver said, so I won't repeat that.
Great.
So I'm going to add to that. First of all, don't be afraid. If you have ideas, you need to experiment on them, put people against them, take all the other stuff off their plate, give them time to experiment and come back with their insights. I think that's really important. Don't try and do this while the person is trying to do all the other things that is on their job. You've got to make tough decisions if you really want to explore and experiment. So don't be afraid to do it.
That's awesome, Vicki. I love the call to action on that. It requires focus of both financial and personnel resources to really make that happen. I love it. Sandra.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat because lots of brilliant ideas shared. I'm going to just share two quick things. One is, change often requires a shift in mindset. And, within an organization, there may be either team members or senior leaders who might be hesitant or resistant to change. So I think building kind of trust and confidence and buy-in early and often is really critical. And then I also just want to make one comment on kind of the funding partnerships, which are absolutely critical. And I think there are absolutely funders who are excited to help you get started. But I would say it's equally important to think about a funding plan and partnerships who will support you as you scale and sustain your innovations.
I love thinking about the medium term, long term, and really thinking about the sustainability there. It's a great add, Sandra. Tina, would love to hear your thoughts on this question as you close out the group.
Yeah, so everybody has touched on a lot of the points that, again, echo sort of our experiences as well. So, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is innovation is it's exciting, it's shiny, it's new. And so making sure that you're really staying true to the needs of your audience and that you're not just innovating for innovation's sake and just doing something because it's a new, whatever exciting technology. It's really has to be contributing to either your theory of change and making sure, it's addressing a specific outcome or addressing a need or a problem of your audience. So that's critical. And then the last one is, and Oliver talked about this briefly, is whether or not you have the expertise in-house. It's not a one and done thing. Technology has to stay fresh, has to stay current, not to avoid becoming obsolete. So, if you don't have that internal resource and you're looking for an external resource, you have to think about the longer term cost too about maintaining it.
Super helpful. I love this, like focus on the problem, stay connected, an eye on the ball on outcomes and to really assess whether the thing that you're innovating is working. And I think these are just all brilliant insights from all of you. So I cannot thank you enough for sharing your thoughts, your perspectives, and these brilliant ideas. I appreciate you all. And with that, we will sort of conclude this innovation section and get us shortly kicked off here with our evidence section. So let's go ahead and bring out our second group to talk about how their organizations unlocked evidence this past year. It's so great to see all of you. As I introduce each of you, I'll quickly share a little bit about how each of your organizations developed new research this past year that either advanced the knowledge of the broader field or validated your specific program models. So first, we have Katherine Bassett, who's the CEO of the New Jersey Tutoring Corps. An external evaluation of the Tutoring Corps School Day pilot program found proficiency gains in math and literacy among the 500 students that received high-dosage tutoring. Next, we have Steve Hannon, who's president and CEO of LENA, which launched 2 independent studies to assess the impact of GROW, the organization's newest program utilizing talk pedometer technology to offer training and coaching for early childhood educators. Both studies found positive outcomes for teachers and students. Next, we have Mindy Schobloom, who is the founder and CEO of On Your Mark. An RCT of On Your Mark found that the organization's one-on-one virtual tutoring had a positive impact on student reading growth, with exceptional growth in letter sounds for kindergartners and on decoding skills for first graders. And lastly, we have Sarah Winters, who is Senior Manager of Evaluation at FIRST, which has been conducting a longitudinal study since 2018, examining how participation in hands-on robotics programs during middle and high school is associated with long-term outcomes. Years later, the study continues to find sustained associations between participation and STEM interest and engagement. Well, welcome you all. Looking forward to digging into this conversation with all of you. So at the foundation, we believe that evidence is critical for scale, but we know that research can sometimes be costly and time intensive and even risky, depending on the results. So sort of curious to hear you all reflect on what drove your belief that conducting research was critical to your success. And also would love to hear how your latest research efforts advance that vision. So Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Thank you for the question. So I think what drove our belief at FIRST in conducting research and evaluating our programs was really curiosity and learning. So we were really curious in wanting to better understand the impact of our programs, and also in learning to better understand how we could improve our programs and where we could focus our resources to better serve our community. So I think that's really where the need for evidence gathering really started. And we started with smaller evaluation projects, with internal evaluation, with gathering feedback and evidence from our community. And then over time, we also saw a need in gathering more evidence to be able to answer questions from our sponsors and from funders. And that eventually over time led to the longitudinal study that you just introduced. And we've been conducting that longitudinal study for 10 years, following our youth participants as they participated in our program, and then beyond participating in our program, going into college, and then some of them now going on into career. So it was really wanting to learn more about their experience and the impact of our program, and then how different implementation models of our program might affect impact and so forth.
I love to hear that, Sarah. I'd love to hear curiosity and learning as sort of the key drivers of this interest. And it's really incredible to see this sort of stair-stepping or building of evidence over time, which has is now concluding in this sort of longitudinal RCT over a long period of time. And I love what you spoke to, which is sort of that the goals are really were about both proving first impact, but also continuing to improve. So proving and improving, which are sort of a beautiful pairing. Thank you for that. Steve, would love for you to jump in on this question.
Great, thanks, Anu. And similar themes here almost, but from Lena's perspective, we were founded on the importance of research and data from the very beginning. And so these latest efforts that were highlighted in this year's report were just two examples, I think, of our regular cycle of data-driven evaluation and improvement. Lena Grow is a professional development program centered on a measure, reflect, practice cycle to boost interactions in childcare, preschool classrooms. And over the past few years, because we've been analyzing the program's data along the way, we had a pretty good internal confidence that the program was strong in the outcomes. But we wanted to elevate the caliber in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Columbus, Ohio for these evaluations to, sort of have more either quasi-experimental or RCT higher caliber evaluations. And we knew these evaluations would strengthen the evidence that Lena Grow's impact is profound, both across not just children's outcomes, but also teacher outcomes. So with children, it was about quality interaction, supporting accelerated language and literacy development, and then teachers more greater confidence in their practice and feeling valued, especially in these times when you have the staffing shortages, as we certainly highlighted as a challenge. So we look at it, it's similar to how FIRST viewed it. We looked at it not only for communicating with funders to know that these programs are working and they have the impact we think they do, but also for prospective partners that are looking at regional or statewide implementations, and those definitely are higher stakes. And then lastly, and importantly, they provide confidence for us as an organization to dive more deeply into innovations that we have with the program and the technology itself to advance it. And one of the things we like to say is we don't want to fool ourselves. And so this is a way to sort of build that confidence internally.
I love that. I love that you started with the core values. It's really embedded in who you are as an organization, and ended with that it's really about proving to yourselves and to your primary customers, families, teachers, and kids that what you're doing is working. It's great to hear that. And I also love seeing that it's not one and done evaluations, that there are many in a series based on the questions you're asking and the stage of evidence building that you're in. Mindy, I'd love to hear your perspective on this topic, especially as you are early stage in your journey, but have also already started to collect some research.
Thanks so much, Anu, and really excited to hear both what Sarah and Steve said around curiosity learning and ongoing research as being really, really important when it comes to evidence building. And I would just add to those factors, timing. As a lot of us know in the ed policy world, over the past couple of years since the pandemic, it's been focused a lot on tutoring as an evidence-based solution for academic learning recovery. And ESSER funding was time-bound, and it created a really limited window of opportunity for school systems to invest in new or unproven solutions without a substantive research base behind them, like us at On Your Mark. So I knew that if we waited until the model was perfect, we'd most likely miss the moment in time to be able to really prove what was possible through scaling. And so that's why we decided to engage in an RCT very early in our inception while we were still in a rapid growth stage. The timing for us was everything. And also finding a researcher that was really excited about our work and aligned with our goals was really, really important, and becoming a part of a movement in gathering evidence around tutoring. So we recently released the results from our RCT, which actually showed that the first positive effects from virtual tutoring across the entire United States. And so timing was really important to us so that we could get out in front and really proving what's possible, not just for On Your Mark, but also for the field. Because of that endeavor into research very early, just this year since the release in the fall, we've landed 2 new state contracts and have also added an additional 800 students during the school year, which is bringing our reach now to 2,700 students across the country and is positioning us to increase our reach to 5,000 students or more in school year 24-25.
It's really incredible, Mindy, and it's really admirable that you sort of started so early in your journey with the same desire to sort of prove and improve with a real attention to the external factors and the external landscape. I think that was really, really brilliant. Katherine, will you close us out on this question? And I would love to hear your perspective.
Sure. So we are a relatively new organization. We are 1 year old as an independent 501c3 as of November. So while we started in May of 2021, we were under the auspices of an organization. And in November of 2022, we stepped out on our own as an independent 501c3. As a researcher myself, as someone who has been a grantor, and as someone who has been a grantee, it was critically important to me that we began collecting data from day one. And so we've been collecting both qualitative and quantitative data from day one and handing those data points over to an external evaluator. The external evaluator takes all the qualitative and quantitative data that we provide to them, and they issue a report to us. We don't touch the report other than to add graphics because they don't do graphics, but we don't change any of the data that they provide to us. And looking at where we started and where we have grown in school year 22-23, which is the latest cycle. We work in cycles. So the latest cycle for which we have an external evaluation, our scholars started math with 16% of our scholars grade level proficient and ended at 23% of our, 40% of our scholars grade level proficient in math. Started at 23% in literacy, ended at 40, coincidentally, grade level proficient in literacy. Why do I think this is important? It is expensive, as you said, It is risky. You can't control the results. You don't know what results you're going to get. It's critically important for us as an organization to know how we're doing. What are we doing? What could we do better? But it's also important for the rest of the field to know that. So we hide nothing. Our reports are published on our website. We want other people to learn from what we've done right, what we've done wrong. These data points, these reports from our external evaluator help us make good decisions. How are we going to change things as we move forward? The direction that we thought we wanted to go in, is it really the right direction when we look at the data? Can we prove it by looking at the data? And how is it going to help us expand and scale our program? So going from 570 scholars in 22, 22, sorry, school year to almost 3,000 scholars in 23-24 school year. We've scaled because of our data, because districts and schools want to work with us because they see that we are getting results.
That's great, Katherine. It's really, really exciting to hear how students received the program and the impact it had on them. I would be curious. I mean, I think I'll just name one thing that I just love about this conversation, which is there's such a beautiful theme of curiosity and learning, just like grounded in the core and the spirit of each of you as you lead functions and the entire organization. So I just want to appreciate you all for that. And Katherine, I'm going to turn back to you as a start on this next question, which is that you kind of already started getting to it, but let's keep this really brief because we're just running a little short on time. What's like one piece of advice that you would give nonprofits about the right time to engage in evidence building?
Day one.
Nice. I love it.
Immediately.
Great.
Before you actually start your program, start gathering your data.
That's great. You can get baseline data on day one. That's incredible. I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Katherine. Awesome. Mindy, you're up.
I agree with Katherine on that one. It's got to be built into the core of your organization as you continue to grow. And I would also say for those organizations who are like nervous about heading into an RCT, what really flipped my mindset around it was shifting from thinking about like, this is the be all and end all of whether or not our program is good or not, into this is a starting place and an opportunity for us to learn and to be really transparent about our data and what our learning agenda is, what we figured out, what we can do well, and also what is it that we are going to work to improve so that we can increase our impact in the spaces that we want to.
I love it. And really having the improvement mindset. It's a nice piece of advice. Steve, what would you offer?
Plus one on what's been said. I like to say that you want to be in a position where you're learning and adapting rather than implementing and hoping. A lot of times we're in that situation. One piece of advice that we've been thinking a lot about with the disruption, getting the most stats on the poll at the beginning was staffing. And so we think about this at the beginning of partner relationships and wondering to know, many of the larger ones especially, what are the other data that they have already taking, they're already collecting as part of the normal operations, and leveraging that along the way with data share agreements from the beginning. That allows you to create comparison groups beyond what you're currently reaching, and certainly has worked well for us to be more cost effective, but also be mindful of your partners in terms of what burden you're putting on them if they're participating in an evaluation with you.
Super strategic and smart and thoughtful to consider both getting the data up front and the impact for those who are involved. Thanks, Steve. Sarah, why don't you close us out on this question? One piece of advice that you'd offer.
Yes, I agree with what everyone else has said. And as our program is now established, so for more like established programs that aren't just starting out, as we grow and evolve and start new initiatives, we want evaluation to be built into creating and adapting those new initiatives as well. So we keep evaluating as we go, and we sort of like build off of knowledge we've already obtained.
Great. So I'm hearing start now, get the baseline data, shift the mindset to this really being about the curiosity-driven process, a learning process, and keep it going, and think about the impact on others that are involved in the study. Great. Okay, so last question here I have for you all. You guys are just so brilliant. I love hearing your thoughts. Okay, so looking ahead, what impact do you think the funding cliff will have on the importance of evidence? Mindy already started to speak about this a bit. So Sarah, why don't we start with you? And then maybe Mindy, you can connect back to where you even started. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, so I think if funding becomes more limited, I think that evidence will become even more important. It will be more important for programs to be able to demonstrate their effectiveness, to be able to demonstrate their impact, and to be able to secure that funding. But also when funding is cut, a lot of times evaluation or research is one of the first things to be cut. So I also want to mention that can be really short-sighted because we need the evidence to be able to create and maintain successful programs. But as nonprofits, we need funding to be able to provide that evidence.
I love it, Sarah. That's such a brilliant point that both it can be useful for funding, and it can also be the first thing to go within an organization when funding gets tight. So just to stay focused on that. Steve, what else would you add, or other perspectives you might contribute here?
Well, I think one of the things we look at, there's obviously the choices about whether a program is evidence-based or not, and then sort of buying decisions come into play there. But I also think the role of organizations like Lena that have integrated data are going to be elevated, because with funding cliffs, there's going to be constraints on funding, and we'll need to be able to serve multiple levels. So what I mean by that is, sure, on the ground outcomes are further because of the intervention, the service, or resource. But agencies are also going to need to find ways to collect evidence and improve database decision-making at higher levels. So how limited resources are best allocated, for example. And so we've been doing a lot of that with looking at teacher ratio, classroom ratios, credentials, and impact of teacher experience on outcomes, and so forth. And so I think there's a way to have data become a kind of a valuable component of decision-making, not just on the ground, but at the higher levels for early childhood policy and practice. So as we have more larger scale statewide initiatives, we've already starting to see this pull because of the finite resources and really trying to be informed and leverage data at multiple levels.
Yeah, I love to hear that, Steve. It really does feel like this is a really unique moment in time to think about the use of data and evidence to inform really critical decision-making at a really important time. So that's a nice segue to you, Mindy. I know you already touched on this topic earlier, but tell us more.
I mean, I can wholeheartedly agree that it's only going to grow the need for evidence and evidence-based programming. We see with ESSER funding running away that federal, state, and district funding needs to go towards evidence-based programs. And from a policy perspective, we need to make sure that the data is readily available for schools during the procurement processes when they are making their buying decisions. And I would say there's been a movement towards this, and we're excited to see this in the different states who are really focusing on tutoring right now, building lists of vetted providers. But as it stands in many of those states, the bar for evidence isn't super high. And so I would really encourage our policymakers to make sure that we are holding a high bar for the evidence that programs need to show in order to be able to encourage states to put their money and to invest limited resources in programming that really works.
I love that. That's right. At the end of the day, these dollars are going to programs that will eventually serve families, teachers, and students. And so the more that those dollars can go to the highest impact opportunities, the better. So thanks for that. Katherine, close us out here.
I agree with everything that's been said, so I'm not going to repeat it. I'll just take this in a slightly different direction.
Sure.
As the funding cliff disappears, so to speak, evidence-based performance becomes even more important for programs like ours as we move into thinking about new funding streams. So we're a tutoring program. We tutor children in grades K to 8, but we are also very interested in expanding the educator pool. So how can we help build that pipeline from pre-service through teacher leader through retiree and keep them engaged in education, specifically in tutoring? And so we are becoming approved as an apprenticeship program in the state of New Jersey. We are already being paid to train other tutoring programs because our tutoring is so intensive and so successful. How do we know that? Because we've collected the evidence. We have the data points. And so everything that everyone already said, and I would add to that, exploring new funding streams. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And I think it's strategic and a nice expansive way of thinking to ensure that great programs can sustain beyond the cliff. Well, thank you to each and every one of you for the brilliant comments. I loved this conversation. And there are so many good nuggets from this that I will carry forward with me. I heard learning and adapting versus implementing and hoping. I heard the commitment to curiosity and learning, the desire to keep proving and keep improving your work, and starting now. So always starting on day one. Thank you all, beautiful remarks. And I will have our next group join. All right, so let's bring out our third and last group. Your organizations each saw impressive growth this last year, meaning that you increased your reach, your revenue, or your organizational sustainability, and sometimes, in some cases, all three. And so as I introduce each of you, I'll share a glimpse into what your organizations have achieved this past year. So Courtney Allison is Chief Academic Officer at EdReports, which this past year alone had 3.2 million unique website visitors, with 114 of the largest 200 districts reporting that they used EdReports to guide decision-making when selecting high-quality instructional materials. That's really incredible. Kate Horst is the author of the Seeds of Learning Frameworks, Executive Director and founder of Fluent Seeds, and currently is transitioning to Senior Advisor for Collaborative Classroom. Through an approach combining PD and materials with coaching and parent education, Fluent Seeds grew its reach by more than 18,000 children since its first year of implementation. That's totally awesome. Sarah Johnson is CEO of Teaching Lab, which provides research-based professional learning aligned to high-quality instructional materials, and reached 11,000 teachers over the past year, a 47% year-over-year increase. Totally nuts. And Thea Saar is Deputy Executive Director at Discover E, the organization's signature program, Future City, offers middle school students the chance to solve sustainability-based civic engineering challenges by creating hypothetical cities of the future. And in the last school year, Future City grew its reach by 94%, now serving 67,000 students, which is really incredible. So thank you all for being here. It's great to see all of you. Let's jump into the conversation, and we'll start with our first question, just around sharing your reflections around what you think the key drivers were for your impressive growth this past year, and if you anticipate any headwinds in the coming years. So Thea, why don't we start with you on this one?
Sure, thank you all. I just want to say that our growth was really driven by two grants, one from the Overdeck Family Foundation and one from Project Management Institute. And these grants allowed us to do things you don't normally get to do, right? A strategic plan, invest in staff, think about where we wanted to go, what was missing, what weren't we doing well, and what did we need to change, including our not only our staff infrastructure, but our technology infrastructure, our websites, how we were collecting data, how we were serving our students. So after that strategic planning process, we were really able to restructure and hire two new positions we never had before. We not only did we grow the number of students, we grew the number of people internally. We went from 5 to 9 over 3 years, which is huge for a small but mighty not-for-profit. Our very first marketing manager and our very first fundraising director. Fundraising had always been part of other people's jobs, but now we have someone fully focused on it. And what this has allowed us to do is to really start to think strategically about where we want to grow, what's next for our organization. And then the mechanics of reaching more educators and more students came down to working with an external marketing company to not only develop a plan, but to look overall at our footprint. Where were we strong? Where were we weak? What were immediate things we could do? What were long-term things we could do? And so we've been slowly rolling out, a marketing and communication plan. So it's not just good enough to get them through the door, but how do you keep them there? How do we become an ongoing and necessary and essential source for people as they engage students in engineering? We've been around, Engineers Week has been around since 1952. But how many people know that Discover Engineering is the organization behind Engineers Week? So that infrastructure problem of our brand awareness is something we've really been working on and fueling that growth. But it's been an exciting journey, and really recognizing that you can't just go, oh, if we just do this one email, if we just reach this one school, if we just do this one thing, it'll all be magic.
It sounds like it's some committed and sustained funding to really serve as growth capital. It sounds like a really intentional choice to focus on branding and marketing. And those are sort of really nice reflections. And I'm sure they will connect to the commentary from your colleagues here. Kate, would love to hear from you on this question.
Great. Thea and I are, the Fluent Seeds was in very similar pathways. Funders really supported us early on. We were able to then grow to build our fee for service. And I think the rest of the day, I'm probably going to be talking about the importance around that. We were really lucky. We already, Seeds of Learning had a quasi-experimental and an RCT that says, you know, if you do this, these kiddos are going to be on target in their predictive skills. And so what happened for the nonprofit after it was initiated 3 years ago was that we really needed to understand how to replicate with fidelity. And one of our theories of change is build deep relationships with the people you work with. And because of that, we were able to keep moving forward with our fee for service dollars. The foundations really helped us in terms of not only monetary supports, but motivation, goals, and a goal accomplishment. And that really makes a difference to a new organization that's on a trajectory like this. We have another key driver, and that was that we had help establishing what were our key priorities, and they were data accountability, which is super important to, you know, continuing our programming and making sure that what we're doing is spot on. Consistency and fidelity in our programming. So we don't just say we're going to do this, but we have an amazing dashboard that we now have that can track educator performance. It can track, you know, it can align with child data. It looks at our outcoming for trainings, and then manage. Another priority was building staff capacity. And so if we're going to do that, we have to care about the people that are out there in the forest doing it. And then our last one was sustainability. And with sustainability, we were rewarded and supported from especially the Overdeck Foundation to think about the leadership. We have a great product, and this is the time, get it out there. And so we have now merged with the Collaborative Classroom, one of the largest nonprofits. You probably know them maybe through their SIPs, but they have being a reader, being a writer. And so we were rewarded to now merge. And because of that, we really believe that we were set to reach hundreds of thousands more children because of their infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I think that's such a strategic choice that as you started to grow and scale, that really thinking about what was the most effective way to get to even more kids. And I think that is often not the path taken, but I hope it is well rewarded down the road. Let's see, Courtney and Sarah. I know both of you and both of your organizations work directly with districts to support educators. From a K-12 lens, what do you think have been the key drivers to each of your organization's growth? And why don't we start with you, Courtney, and then over to you, Sarah.
Sure. I mean, I could echo many of Thea's and Kate's points, but I think to add on to that, there are a couple of things that we've really focused on. We've focused on a district and state strategy around the impact of high quality instructional materials. And then again, with the marketing, which I know Thea brought up, but we invested in marketing and thinking about our reach, our brand building, and how our resources are distributed. And so we spend a lot of time understanding our key audiences. So thinking about who are the decision makers that are going to be adopting materials in our case, and what is influencing their decision, how do we get to them? Thinking about the other stakeholders around people that are directly impacted by those decisions at the school level or the district level, and then who else is in the influence space? Who is influencing the decision makers? So those school boards, families, and community leaders. And we've invested a lot in marketing and communications. I would echo Thea and say, like, it's not the same when it's external. We get an external perspective from time to time, but having those internal folks who know us and know our reviews really well has been incredibly important. And then we pay attention to where decision makers and stakeholders are listening. So this year we piloted some new social media platforms, some new content formats. We released a podcast and also have it on YouTube because we know that podcasts are where educators get a lot of information, but also video is a key format where educators also get a lot of information. And so we've really been observing and responding to those trends to make sure that we can get to the folks that really need the information and then are going to use that information for decisions.
I love it. I love that. I imagine, Sarah, you'll have some common themes here and maybe even some additional perspectives. So why don't you jump on in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to identify two main drivers. So one reason why we were able to achieve impressive growth is on the supply side, and the other one is on the demand side. So on the supply side, at Teaching Lab, we've been optimizing our coaching model for years. And aligned with a rigorous evidence base, we found that teachers improve dramatically when they get personalized, curriculum-based, and ongoing coaching support. And what we say is just like tutoring for kids generates a high impact, coaching is like tutoring for teachers. So we've been saying that for years, but at the same time, it can be a really expensive intervention to scale, especially when it's done in person. But then the demand side shifted. And this is because school systems recognized that they had to do something differently in order to recover from the pandemic. And then they received an infusion of resources from the federal government. And when leaders asked us, how should we spend this money? We were ready with an answer. And if you can get school systems to pay for something that is high impact for kids, that teachers love, and that you have the capacity to do excellently, that's really the holy grail in education. Of course, what this means is that as school systems have fewer resources, we're going to need to pivot. But that's why we're also trying to get ready for that by creating tech-enabled approaches to our coaching model that hopefully can be more scalable.
Thanks, Sarah and Courtney. I do hear a lot of commonality in sort of like both the demand and the supply sides. I like that framing, Sarah, even what you spoke to, Courtney, around the demand building. So finding out who your stakeholders are, where they are, what they're listening to, and who they're listening to in order to better actually position the organization and its work to really drive decision making. So thank you both. All right, so let's move on to this next question here, which is, all of you, I think, operate in a space with really challenging labor markets. And Sarah, you sort of touched on this a little bit as we think about cost and constrained fiscal climate upcoming. What have you learned that has allowed you to succeed despite these labor market challenges? And why don't you kick us off on this one, Sarah?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, the labor market challenges, they keep me up at night. There are teacher shortages. There are also other shortages that I don't think are as widely reported on. So what we see in school systems across the nation right now is that there used to be more adults in schools, and there's this layer of instructional support for teachers that is decimated. And that's why we're being hired to sort of replace that layer that districts and schools used to hire for. This is a huge problem, and as school systems have fewer resources, I think it could get worse. I'm really not trying to start off being really pessimistic. I have more positive lessons that we've learned. But I think what we learned from the pandemic is that the organizations that survived had some part of their organization that was committed to innovation, and when the context dramatically changed, they were ready to adapt to that new context. And so at Teaching Lab, what we're trying to do is look to the future, predict even things that we don't want to be true, like we don't see these labor shortages getting that much better. So then what does that mean that we have to get ready for? And what does that mean we have to innovate? And so we've carved out a piece of Teaching Lab that's really focused on AI innovations in education that both increase instructional coherence and reduce all this friction that is inherent in the current teacher workflows. And what I mean by that is it's hard to be a teacher. It's hard because they've got to figure out how to implement across districts, adapt like 2,000 different products. curriculum, assessments, supplemental practice platforms. They've got kids that are out of school for 2 years. It's just really hard to address all the challenges in schools right now. And for the first time, I think we have technology that could actually make each step in that process of teaching a little bit easier. So we want to do more innovation in that area and then make the teaching profession actually more desirable over time.
Super helpful. I'm hearing that you sort of scenario planning and both maybe more optimistic scenarios and potentially, more pessimistic scenarios could really help put you all in the driver's seat as organizational leaders to make really strategic and important choices about when to pivot, when to adapt, and being ready for that. I also just love this point around really reducing the friction. We know that the most adults and educators in the system are feeling sort of overburdened. And so anything that we can do to make that a little bit less burdensome, the better. Courtney, what else would you add on to this conversation that Sarah got us started with?
Well, I think maybe I can talk a little bit about the educator angle from teachers who are really key to writing our reports. And so we rely on, and we have a network of about 1,000 teachers across the country who have looked at materials and contributed to EdReports reviews. And they are our most important, I'd say, stakeholders in many ways. But we've seen a lot of changes, like Sarah says. They certainly keep all of us up at night, particularly as we think about new areas like the emphasis on foundational skills, which came up in the poll earlier, or our expansion into pre-K, which is a really unique space in terms of the teaching force there. But we do a couple things that I think are important to our educators and are really key to EdReports. We pay them. So educators that participate in curriculum reviews receive a stipend for their time. And so although they report that it's great professional development and they love, looking at the materials, we also know there are incredible demands on their time. And so we want to make sure that we're actually compensating them for their expertise. We spend a lot of time thinking and giving teachers tools for voice and advocacy. So why do you want to learn about your materials? Why might you want to participate in reviews or use reviews? Because it can help you have a voice in your district or your state as they're choosing materials. And so we invest in our teachers in that way. We also listen to what they say they need. So what kind of information would be useful to have about materials in general? More multilingual learner support information about various platforms and technology that's in use in the curriculum. And so thinking through with that and then being responsive and actually putting it in the reviews so teachers can see they're asking for things and we're responding to them. And then our follow through is that our reports are public and totally transparent. And so we put our tools out there, we put our evidence guides out there, we put the full reviews out there. We're not hiding anything. And so I think educators know that they can trust the information that they get from EdReports, that the tools and the reports themselves have their voice embedded in them. And then if they're going to review for us, that they're going to be compensated and they're going to gain skills to actually make use of the new information. And that's been a really powerful lever to have a group of educators that's really loyal to EdReports and hopefully is making even more impact in their own communities and maybe raising job satisfaction, Sarah, which then continues to make teaching an attractive profession in a really difficult time.
Yeah, I love that. I love that there's so many components that you're speaking to here, everything from like really creating a meaningful incentive, offering real value for teachers, and really helping them to see what's in it for them, which is that they can have a real voice in shaping decision making. Thank you for that. Kate, I would love to invite you here just to share what you've learned as you've scaled, knowing that the labor market is quite challenging these days.
Great. Thanks, team, for painting the landscape. Yes, these are really tough times for the early childhood field. And, for Fluent Seeds, we enter into partnership with an intent to support the staff with skill development and understanding. Leaders, organizations are stressed, and so we like to come in and be available for whatever they need. If they want all of our training, coaching, and data driven, or if they just want parts of it, and so we support them where they're at. We know that success is contagious, and we recently have a partner that we work with through our RCT. They had a 10% teacher loss versus the the average of 18%. And that was because they had some systems already built up inside. And so when the door is revolving and go in and out and in and out, they at least had some spoken practices. And then we come in and we support them along the way. You know, teachers are, there's a shortage, but there's also a quality that's being called into question now, that our kiddos need to have the highest quality. We know about their brains, we know about the interactions, we know about meeting the children so that they can feel confident, capable, and joyful learners. And so we know that it's important when we support organizations that we are certain about our interactions, about our professional development, and about our coaching if we're going to build success. And so some things about SEEDS is our pedagogy is about how to interact with little ones and what is important in terms of predictive later skills. Fluent SEEDS is grounded in a skill development process. And so if we interact with a new teacher, we approach it from where that person is at, and then we do the knowledge, the models, and the practice, and then the coaching so that there's ongoing feeding so that there is success built. Fluent SEEDS is a training, coaching, and data-driven organization, and teachers love it when they know that they're really having success, when they're really impacting the children that they're serving every day. And then we're a user-friendly curriculum. So instead of adding on a new curriculum, we really step into where they're at and support them with their early intervention strategies that will help them to succeed. The labor markets have been a super challenge, and we just take it one partnership at a time. And because we're in partnership, we listen, we see, we hear, and we try to understand what our organizations and what we need to do, and then move in where they're able to do that. So
thank you, Kate. That's coming through loudly and clearly from what you're sharing. I love that you just meeting people where they're at, making sure they're spending time on the most important things that can have real impact for kids. And really providing that flexibility and choice based on what people have the availability of time to do. And I love this phrase, success is contagious. It's so true. I hadn't heard it framed that way before, but that's right. How can we build on what makes people feel successful in every environment? So thank you for that, Kate. Thea, what else would you add here? I'd love to hear your perspective on this question. Oh, yes, you're on mute. No problem.
All right. Yeah, no, what an interesting conversation. And, I think we're all struggling with the same thing. And here at Discovery, we're really invested in student-centered learning and the teacher as facilitator. And for a lot of our educators out there, that's not the world that they're comfortable in, right? They're there, maybe a hands-on experiment, telling the kids what to do, but really let the kids design and build their cities. And you're there to help them. So we have been working really hard on offering drop-in, sessions where teachers can come in casually and say, hey, wait, here's a question I have. What are external resources we can bring to bear? How can we keep the momentum moving? And now starting to look at, is there an opportunity for us to partner with someone to do professional development? Offer some kind of professional development. We're seeing it in some of our regions where they're doing that work locally. We're seeing a lot more retention of those first-year teachers. If we can get them through the first year of Future City, we can keep them. But that first year is really tough. And we're also starting to think a lot about the differences in our audiences. What does a classroom teacher need from Future City versus what does an after-school leader need from Future City? And those are two very different things. Even though they kind of, overlap a little bit. So what are some program developments that we can create? How does Future City operate in those different markets? We just expanded into high school. We're doing a experiment this year and a pilot next year, and starting to talk to some partners about maybe Future City College. So really thinking about where are all the places we can be and what do we need to do to provide resources and support for the folks in those arenas.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Thea, that partners to help implement when there are staffing or labor challenges is just a really critical solution. And I think many of you touched on that in different ways. Okay, so we're coming up on our last question here, and I'm going to ask you all to keep it brief so we can get a few questions in from the audience. What's one best practice that you would share with others that are seeking to scale in this coming year? Thea, why don't you kick us off?
I would say get your house in order first and know your strengths. Where are you strong and where might you experiment? Do you have time this year to experiment, or is it just getting your house in order and concentrating your strengths and experimenting next year?
Great. Love it. Kate, tell us what you might advise.
Yeah, well, I just am so happy to be on here and to say, yes, there were challenges and we kept a growth mindset every time there was a setback. But I think our biggest thing was that we standardized our pricing and our sales playbook. And so we were kind of all over the map. And if we were going to do half funding and half fee for service, we had to do that. And instead of customizing everything, we standardize it and it feels really right.
I love that. So make sure you're ready. I heard from you, Thea. Kate, I'm hearing some things should really be standardized and you can get a lot of efficiency out of that. Courtney, what would you add? What's your piece of advice?
I think I'd go back to do not underinvest in Marcoms. Okay. Your marketing and communications needs to be a key investment, and it's really commonly overlooked as a strategic driver of growth. So definitely that. But I mean, I just have to say that our organizational health work has really been instrumental. Yeah. And so I agree with Thea, and Overdeck's been key in that. We've done some capacity building through both RevGen and some executive team work, and that's been absolutely incredible and really important. So maybe I have to leave with 2.
I love it. I love it. They're both critical. Sarah, why don't you close us out? What's the best practice you would share?
So I have a framework with 7 tips, but if you want to hear all 7, just reach out to me. But I will share 3 interrelated headlines. Ready? So one is implement excellently, get renewed, get referrals. This works way better than us having a giant sales team. Apply to RFPs and get embedded within as many procurement systems, because when you do this, you're making it way easier for school systems to partner with you. And then finally, be the one that gets the phone call. And what this means is many times districts and states, they have money they need to spend. And you want to be the one that gets the call when a district has $200,000 left, and you want to be ready with your evidence-based ideas so they use that money to truly improve teaching and learning.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really sharp, and I would expect nothing less. And I hope that you'll share the 7 tips, and maybe you can drop them in the chat, because I think you'll probably have a lot of folks who'd be interested in hearing about all 7. But those ones seem totally right. In some way, actually sustaining the existing customers can actually be a better use of time and funds than what it might take to build a massive sales engine to get new customers in the doors. And that's a really spot on. Well, this has just been a totally eye-opening conversation. I love that there are so many different perspectives here, but also a lot of shared reflections, especially in the K-12 space. So thank you all for sharing your perspective and insights. Really great conversation. So what I would like to do now is I would like to have you all stay here on video, and I would love to bring all the other esteemed panelists back on video. So we have everybody here. I think we have time for just one question from the audience. And let's see, is everybody back on here? I think so. Great. And what I might do is, first I'll direct this question to Vicki, because I think this question came up during your reflections, but I will invite maybe a couple others to jump in and share if they have thoughts as well. So for organizations that are focused on tech-based solutions, what are you doing to address technology fatigue, especially as we look at this fiscal climate and we sort of are expecting that maybe technology will become more front and center? So Vicki, why don't you start us off with that?
Thanks. We tackle it head on, and in our district partnerships program, which, as I said, is in 500 communities, we've got about 1 million kids participating. We work directly with the district to be very clear about the goal that they're trying to achieve through using the tool, help them plan and develop a clear implementation plan. And that has to include professional learning from our team to the educators in the system and the instructional leaders in the system. We roll out that professional learning, and it could be in person, it could be live virtual, it could be asynchronous, right? We're very flexible. We have to be flexible because we know professional learning time is there's so little of it. And getting onto it is like winning the lottery, literally. So you've got to be flexible, you've got to tackle it, and you've got to really help instructional leaders and teachers understand, how does this tool fit into your instructional design, the instructional design you already have. And if you are not doing that, you will not get used. And the other thing that we really try and stress is, let's have times in the schedule for the use of the technology. If you don't have time in the schedule and everybody's not agreeing to that, then you're not going to get used. And so that is what we do. And we try and help people understand, you do not need a huge amount of time. You do not have to blow up your schedule to use the tool effectively.
That's super helpful, Vicki. I mean, just like integrating into the existing system where kids already are, making it not feel like an add-on can contribute to the work actually just feeling so much more integrated into the day-to-day. Is there anyone else who wants to jump in on this question? Sure, I could. Go ahead, Mindy. You want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the things that we were facing as we launched virtual tutoring, because we have beliefs around the virtual nature of it being much more scalable than an in-person tutoring solution, was that folks just had so much Zoom fatigue, and they were super scared to put, especially for us, 5, 6, and 7-year-olds in front of a computer again. And what we found we needed to do was do a lot of really intentional work with our tutors on relationship building. So we were building the conditions for students to be incredibly excited to go and see their tutors, and also manage the dosage. We started out with 30 minutes. It was too long. And so we shortened it when we realized that was the case. And now we spend 20 minutes with our students every day. And our students are so excited to go and see their tutors because we've contained the dosage. So much so they're saying bye and giving the heart signs and like saying bye as they close their computer screens. So I think managing the dosage is just really, really important.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too, Mindy, is that you're just saying really focus on what is right for the user. Like, and I think this connects to some of the points that many of you made over the course of the conversation, that really knowing what is flexible versus where you can make choice, but also where you can personalize the experience really based on what the student or teacher is really ready for. So I think that's really, there's so much intelligence in that response and reflection. So thank you, Mindy. Maybe you have time for one more reflection. Is there anyone who really wants to get in on this question, who feels like they have a real insight to share on addressing technology fatigue? Yeah, it does seem like a challenge, huh? If anyone has any reflections, though, maybe I'm just going to do a quick scan.
I'll share one thought.
Okay,
and this is
yes,
in
please.
the informal environment, so in the at-home environment. I think actually one thing we found is that technology, and particularly video, is often a joint opportunity for parents and kids to come together and engage, especially, you know, if the media is short, it's readily accessible, it's engaging. So, you know, there've been decades of research on joint media engagement, but I think, you know, in that informal space, often you'll see, you know, families coming together around the media, and that's a plus. That's not on the fatigue side. I think that's on the
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a very optimistic way of ending this conversation, actually, in that in some ways technology can actually bring people and families together. And maybe on that note, I'll just share a really, really deep note of gratitude to each and every one of you. This is just a really smart and strategic and thoughtful conversation, and just appreciate everyone in the chat. I know the chat's been very active throughout the conversation. I know some of you have been answering questions too as they've been coming in. So I just loved unpacking these lessons with all of you. And I hope everyone in our audience leaves today with some actionable insights and even maybe a dose of inspiration for the year ahead. So with that, I'll ask, just say thank you again to the panelists and ask you to turn off your video, and we'll make sure we can feature your contact information here so folks can see it. But if you'd like to contact any of our panelists from today's webinar, you should see their contact information here, which will be shared in an email as follow-up to all of the folks who registered along with the recording. So with that, I will just thank you again, both the panelists and our attendees. I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of your day. And this was just an incredible conversation. Thanks again. Bye.